The dress in the window. The street was quiet that evening, but the lights from the small shop window glowed warmly. Inside the glass, a dress hung on display. It was simple, yet elegant. Soft fabric that seemed to move even without the wind. Sandra stopped walking when her eyes caught it. She was not someone who usually admired clothes for long, but this dress made her pause. It reminded her of something gentle, something that carried grace without asking for attention. Keanu was walking beside her. He noticed her step slow down. He turned his head and followed her gaze. He saw the way her eyes softened, the small smile forming on her lips. She whispered almost to herself, "It's beautiful." Her words carried more feeling than she expected. Keanu said nothing. He only looked at the dress once, then back at her. He saw the way she admired it, the way it seemed to connect with a part of her heart she did not often show. He smiled quietly, then let the moment pass. The two of them continued walking. They had been invited to a gathering later that night, but their minds were somewhere else. Sandra was thinking of that dress, though she didn't say it out loud. She thought it was too much, something she didn't really need. She reminded herself that clothes were not important compared to the things she valued, yet the image of that dress stayed with her. Keanu noticed her silence. He did not ask questions. Instead, he stored that moment deep inside him. When they reached the place of the gathering, music and laughter filled the hall. People dressed in shining suits and bright gowns moved from one group to another. The air carried stories, pride, and sometimes hidden loneliness. Keanu entered quietly, greeting those who came to him with kind nods. Sandra followed, her own warmth making people smile. But inside, her thoughts still returned to that small shop window. In the middle of all the lights and noise, Sandra found herself standing near a balcony. She wanted a breath of fresh air. She thought no one noticed her, but Keanu did. He watched from a distance, respecting her space. He always respected space, silence, and moments others often missed. Someone came up to Sandra and complimented her on her look for the evening. She smiled politely, but deep inside she remembered the dress. She wondered how it might feel to wear it, even just once, but she quickly pushed the thought away. While she was lost in that thought, Keanu had already made a decision. He left the gathering for a short while, unnoticed. He walked back toward the shop. The streets were quieter now. He entered the little store, his calm voice asking if the dress in the window was still available. The shopkeeper smiled, a little surprised. "Yes, it is," he said. Keanu nodded, and without another word, he quietly paid for it. No one around him knew what he was doing, and that was exactly how he wanted it. For him, it was never about grand gestures or showing the world his actions. It was about small kindnesses, silent respect, and the way he could bring light to someone's heart without asking for thanks. He held the wrapped dress gently, like it was fragile, not because of the fabric but because of the meaning it carried. Back at the gathering, Sandra didn't know where he had gone. She looked around once but thought maybe he was just talking to someone. She didn't ask. When he returned, he blended into the crowd again, quiet and calm as always. In his hands was no sign of what he had done. He waited for the right moment. Later that night, after the gathering had ended, they walked home together under the streetlights. Sandra laughed softly at a story someone had told. Keanu smiled as he listened. Then, without warning, he stopped by the same shop window. The dress was gone from display. Sandra paused, confused for a moment. "Oh, someone must have bought it," she said with a little sadness in her voice. Keanu looked at her, his eyes calm, filled with warmth. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he handed her a small package he had been carrying silently. She opened it slowly, her hands almost trembling. When she saw what was inside, her breath caught. It was the dress, the very same one she had admired. Her eyes filled with tears, not because of the fabric, but because of the thought behind it. She looked at him, searching for words, but none came. He only smiled softly and said, "I thought it belonged to you." The night air was cool, but her heart was warm. In that single moment, Sandra realized something deeper. It was not about the dress. It was about being seen. truly seen. He had noticed the small things she didn't even say out loud. Their walk home continued in silence, but it was a silence filled with meaning. The kind of silence that doesn't need words because the heart already understands. Sandra held the dress close, and in her mind she thought, sometimes the quietest gestures carry the loudest love. The gift unwrapped the next morning, Sandra woke early. Sunlight touched the curtains, filling the room with a soft glow. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the box again. The dress was folded neatly inside, its fabric catching the morning light. She traced her fingers across it, still unable to believe what had happened. She thought of Keanu's quiet smile, the way he had handed it to her without expecting thanks. Tears touched her eyes again, not out of sadness but because of how deeply it moved her. She whispered to herself, "Why does he notice things no one else does?" Later that day, she decided to try the dress on. When she stood in front of the mirror, she froze. The reflection staring back at her felt different. It wasn't just about looking beautiful. It was about feeling valued, as if every part of her that often went unseen had suddenly been recognized. But along with that warmth came doubt. She wondered if she even deserved such kindness. Deep inside, Sandra carried old scars, memories of times when people had overlooked her or made her feel small. The dress became more than fabric. It was a reminder that someone had cared enough to look closer. Still, she asked herself, "Am I worth this?" That evening, Sandra and Keanu were invited to another gathering, this one smaller and more private. Sandra hesitated to wear the dress. Part of her wanted to, but another part feared what people might say. Keanu noticed her hesitation. He walked over gently and asked, "What are you thinking?" She looked down at the dress in her hands. "What if people think it's too much? What if they laugh? I'm not sure I can carry it the way others can." Keanu listened carefully. His voice was calm when he replied, "You don't need anyone's permission to feel beautiful. You just need to be yourself. The dress is not about them. It's about you." His words sank deep into her heart. At the gathering, when she finally stepped in wearing the dress, the room fell silent for a moment. It wasn't because the dress was loud or flashy. It was because it carried grace. She carried grace. People turned their heads. Some whispered in admiration, others with envy. And that was when the conflict began. One woman, dressed in sparkling jewels, gave a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She said loud enough for others to hear, "Oh, that's quite simple. I guess anyone can look good in the right light." The words stung. Sandra's confidence shook for a second. She lowered her gaze, but before she could retreat, Keanu stepped closer. He didn't confront the woman with anger. Instead, he looked at Sandra and spoke softly so only she could hear. "Don't let empty words steal your light. You shine because of who you are, not because of what they say." Sandra breathed in slowly. His words lifted her again. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her head, and walked further inside the room. Throughout the night, people approached her with genuine kindness, complimenting her with smiles. She realized something important. Envy will always exist, but so will respect. Keanu stayed near, never making the moment about himself. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to remind her that she was not alone. But there was another twist. Toward the end of the evening, Sandra overheard two people speaking near the corner. One of them said, "She thinks she belongs here because of him. Without him, she would never stand out." The words pierced deeper than she expected. For a moment, she believed them. Doubt returned stronger than before. Keanu saw the change in her expression. Later, when they left the hall and walked under the night sky, he finally asked, "What did you hear in there?" She hesitated, then admitted, "They said I only shine because of you, that I wouldn't be seen if you weren't here." Keanu stopped walking. He looked at her with eyes filled with honesty and said, "They're wrong. You were shining before I ever bought that dress. I only held up a mirror so you could see it." Sandra felt her throat tighten. The truth of his words hit her harder than the cruelty of others. As they continued home, Sandra carried a new strength with her. She realized the dress was not just a gift. It was a test of how much she valued herself. And in the quiet of the night, she whispered, Maybe this is not about a dress at all. Maybe it's about learning to believe in myself. Keanu heard her words, and though he didn't respond, his small smile showed he agreed. Shadows of doubt. The following week, Sandra kept the dress carefully folded. She did not wear it again, not yet. Sometimes she would open the box, look at it, and then close it gently. Each time, she remembered both the beauty of the night and the harsh words whispered behind her back. Her heart was divided. One part felt proud of the way she had stood tall, another part carried doubt like a heavy shadow. Keanu noticed. He always noticed. Though he never pushed her with questions, his silence often carried more support than words. One evening, while they were sitting by the window, Sandra finally broke the silence. "Keanu, why do people hurt others with words? What do they get from it?" He thought for a moment before answering. "Sometimes people throw stones because they see someone carrying light. They don't want to admit that light comes from kindness, so they try to break it." She sighed. "It feels unfair." "It is," he said gently. "But it's also a chance to grow stronger. Every cruel word gives us the choice to let it break us, or let it build us." A few days later, Sandra was invited to a small charity event. She wanted to go, but she feared the same whispers, the same envy. As she stood in front of her wardrobe holding the dress in her hands, doubt returned. She asked herself, "Am I strong enough to face them again?" When Keanu saw her hesitation, he said softly, "You don't have to wear it tonight. Strength doesn't come from fabric. It comes from within." But Sandra surprised herself. She replied, "No, I will wear it. Not because of them, but because I want to remind myself that I can." Keanu gave a small smile, the kind that said he believed in her more than she believed in herself. At the event, things started smoothly. The hall was filled with warmth, people giving speeches, children laughing in the corner. Sandra felt a little lighter, more at peace. But then came the test. As she stood near a table, a man approached with a sharp tone in his voice. "So this is the famous dress I've been hearing about," he said. "I must say, I expected more. Maybe the stories were exaggerated." Sandra froze. The words hit her. But before she could respond, Keanu quietly stepped forward. His eyes were calm, but his voice carried quiet strength. Stories are always exaggerated, but the truth is simple. The truth is that kindness and grace don't need approval. The man laughed awkwardly and walked away, but the damage had already touched Sandra's heart. She wondered if people would always reduce her worth to appearances, if she would ever be free of their judgment. Later that night, when the crowd had faded, Sandra sat alone outside the hall. The air was cool, the city quiet around her. Keanu joined her, sitting silently by her side. She whispered, "I thought wearing the dress would make me stronger, but it feels like it only brings more battles." Keanu looked at her, his voice steady. "Strength is not about avoiding battles. It's about facing them and remembering who you are in the middle of them." His words settled into her heart like seeds. She didn't fully believe them yet, but she wanted to. A twist came the next day. The story of Sandra's dress had spread wider than she imagined. Not because of the whispers, but because someone at the charity event had shared photos of her online. Messages began to appear. Some were cruel, mocking her, while others praised her elegance and humility. The voices of the world felt louder than ever, pulling her in two directions. Sandra sat with her phone in her hands, reading comments that made her both smile and cry. She turned to Keanu and said, "How do I know which voices to listen to?" He replied softly, "Listen to the voice that speaks with love. The rest are only noise." That night, as she folded the dress again, Sandra whispered to herself, "Maybe this is not just about what people see. Maybe it's about learning what I choose to believe." For the first time, she felt a small spark of strength growing inside her, one that didn't depend on the dress or even on the kindness of Keanu. It was her own. And in that quiet moment, she realized the dress was becoming more than a gift. It was becoming a mirror of her journey. When silence speaks, the days after the charity event felt heavy for Sandra. Her phone kept buzzing with new messages. Some were kind, full of praise for her grace, but others carried sharp words, questioning her worth, mocking her choices. She tried to ignore them, but late at night when the world was quiet, those words echoed the loudest. She sat alone, staring at the dress in its box, asking herself, "Why do I let strangers decide how I feel?" Keanu noticed her silence. He found her sitting by the window one evening, her eyes tired. Without asking questions, he brought her a cup of tea and placed it beside her. He didn't fill the air with words. He let the silence breathe. After a while, Sandra said softly, "Sometimes silence feels louder than noise. It makes me hear the words I'm trying to forget." Keanu nodded slowly. Silence can hurt, but it can also heal. It depends on what you fill it with. If you fill it with doubt, it will crush you. If you fill it with belief, it will carry you. His words stayed in her heart long after he left the room. A few days later, Sandra was asked to attend a gathering where she would be introduced as a guest of honor for her charity support. It was supposed to be a moment of celebration, but she felt unready. She told Keanu, "I don't know if I can face another crowd. What if the whispers return? What if people look at me and see only flaws?" Keanu's reply was calm yet firm. "If you let fear lead, it will always return. But if you stand once more, stronger than before, the whispers will lose their power." Sandra wanted to believe him, but fear clung tightly. On the evening of the event, she stood before her mirror once again. The dress lay across her bed. Her heart raced as she picked it up. She remembered the laughter, the envy, the cruel words. But she also remembered the kindness, the respect, and the quiet strength Keanu always gave her. With trembling hands, she put the dress on. When she looked into the mirror, this time she didn't ask, "Do I deserve this?" Instead, she whispered, "I will not hide any more." At the gathering, when she entered, the room turned quiet again. Some smiled warmly, some stared with envy, and others whispered behind their hands. Sandra felt her chest tighten, but she remembered Keanu's words. Silence can hurt, but it can also heal. Instead of lowering her eyes, she lifted her head high and walked with calm steps. Soon, a speaker called her to the front to thank her for her contributions. As Sandra stepped onto the stage, the lights brightened and the room grew silent. Her voice trembled at first, but she spoke from the heart. "I know there are people who look at me and see only a dress, but I hope you can see more. I hope you see kindness, respect, and the effort we all make to help others. Clothes may catch the eye, but it is the heart that makes us worthy." The hall remained silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, people began to clap. Some clapped lightly, others with true feeling. Sandra's eyes searched the crowd until they found Keanu. He wasn't clapping the loudest, but his small nod meant more than all the noise in the room. After the event ended, Sandra walked outside with Keanu. The night sky stretched above them, filled with stars. She exhaled deeply. "I thought I would fall apart out there," she admitted, "but instead I felt stronger." Keanu looked at her, his voice steady. "That's because you spoke your truth. Truth doesn't need armor, it only needs courage." Her heart swelled at his words. She realized that every time she had doubted herself, he had gently reminded her of her own strength. Yet, a twist waited for them. As they returned home, Sandra received a message from someone she once trusted, a friend she hadn't spoken to in years. The message said, "I saw your speech. You've changed. But don't forget, the world will turn on you when you least expect it." The words cut deep. Sandra's newfound courage trembled again. She showed the message to Keanu. He read it quietly, then handed the phone back. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried meaning. Sometimes the ones closest to us throw the sharpest words. But remember this, kindness is not weakness and resilience is not arrogance. You are not who they say you are. You are who you choose to be. That night, as Sandra lay in bed, she held the dress close to her heart. She whispered, "This is not just a gift. It is my reminder to rise, even when the world tries to push me down." And in that whisper, she felt a new fire growing inside her. The breaking point days passed, and Sandra began to carry herself with more quiet confidence. She no longer hid the dress in its box. Instead, she hung it by the window where the sunlight touched it each morning. Every time she saw it, she reminded herself of what she had said on stage, that worth is not found in fabric but in the heart. But even as her strength grew, the world continued to test her. Messages still poured in, some filled with admiration, others with cruelty. And then came an invitation that would challenge her in ways she did not expect. A famous designer had heard about her story and wanted her to appear at a public event wearing the dress. The letter praised her humility, her quiet strength, and the way she had inspired others. Sandra read it carefully, her heart torn. On one hand, it was a chance to show kindness and resilience to more people. On the other, she feared the spotlight. She feared the whispers would grow louder, that envy would twist her story into something ugly. When she showed the invitation to Keanu, he looked at her with calm eyes. "What do you feel in your heart?" he asked. She hesitated. "I feel afraid, but I also feel like maybe this is bigger than me now." Keanu nodded. "Fear will follow you no matter where you go. The question is, will you walk anyway?" The day of the event arrived. Cameras lined the entrance, reporters held their microphones, and flashes lit the night like lightning. Sandra stood in front of the mirror once more, her hands trembling as she adjusted the dress. Her reflection stared back, not of a woman seeking attention, but of someone carrying the weight of both admiration and criticism. When Keanu entered the room, he saw her fear. Without saying a word, he walked up, adjusted the shoulder of the dress gently, and whispered, "You are ready." As they stepped into the event, the noise grew loud. People shouted her name, photographers fought for pictures, and the whispers she feared echoed through the crowd. Some voices praised her beauty. Others sneered, saying, "She's only here because of him." The words stabbed her again, but this time she did not bow her head. She lifted her chin and walked with calm steps. When she reached the stage, the designer introduced her as someone who represented quiet grace, someone who had shown that humility could shine brighter than pride. But as Sandra stood there, a woman in the audience shouted loudly, "She doesn't belong here. She's nothing without his name." The hall went silent. The words hung in the air like a knife. Sandra's chest tightened, her breath heavy. She looked at the crowd, frozen. Keanu rose slowly from his seat. The room turned to him. His voice was not loud, but it carried strength. "You are wrong," he said. "She belongs here because she has a heart that inspires others. I only walked beside her. She chose her own path." His words cut through the silence. The hall erupted with applause, not because of noise, but because of truth. Later that night, when the event was over, Sandra sat with Keanu under the quiet stars. Her hands shook as she whispered, "For a moment, I thought I would break." Keanu looked at her gently. "But you didn't. Sometimes breaking points are not where we fall apart. Sometimes they are where we rise stronger." Tears filled her eyes. She realized he was right. Every cruel word, every moment of doubt, had only made her stronger. A twist came the next morning. Headlines appeared everywhere. "Humble Grace steals the spotlight." Photos of her in the dress spread across newspapers and screens. Some praised her courage, others questioned her place. But what caught Sandra's heart most was a letter from a young girl who wrote, "When I saw you, I realized I don't have to be perfect to be worthy." Sandra held the letter close. Her eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "This is why I keep going." The dress was no longer just hers. It had become a symbol for others too. That evening, as Keanu sat quietly reading, Sandra approached him with the letter in her hand. "Someone out there found strength because of me," she said softly. Keanu looked up, his eyes calm, his voice steady. That is the true meaning of kindness, when your story becomes someone else's courage. Sandra realized then that the journey was far from over. The world would continue to test her, but now she carried not only her own strength but the hope she gave to others. The test of truth, the letter from the young girl, stayed with Sandra. She placed it beside the dress, almost like it belonged there. Every time she looked at the words, she felt both proud and humbled. But with pride came a new weight, responsibility. She whispered to herself one night, "If people see me as a symbol, then I cannot fail." "But what if I do?" Keanu, who had been listening quietly, replied gently, "Symbols are not perfect. They are real. People find courage in your struggles, not in your perfection." His words brought comfort, but also fear. She realized the journey ahead was not only about facing strangers, it was about facing herself. A week later, Sandra received another invitation. This one was different. It was not about fashion or public praise. It was for a discussion on kindness, resilience, and the power of humility. Leaders, thinkers, and artists would be present. Sandra felt nervous. She could wear the dress and stand silent, but here she was expected to speak deeply. She asked Keanu, "What if I have nothing important to say?" His answer was calm, as always. "Then say the truth. Truth is always enough." The night of the event arrived. Sandra wore the dress, but this time it felt lighter, as if it had become part of her rather than something she carried with fear. The hall was grand but quiet, filled with people who valued words more than appearances. Still, Sandra's heart pounded. When it was her turn to speak, she stood at the podium. The lights shone softly and the room waited. Her voice trembled at first. "I never thought a simple dress could lead me here. I never thought my silence or my tears would mean anything to anyone. But I learned something. Kindness is not weakness. Resilience is not pride. Humility is not silence. It is strength." The hall listened. Every face turned toward her. She continued, "I faced envy, whispers, and doubt. I still face them. But I realize the world's voices cannot decide my worth. And if one young girl found courage in my story, then I know this journey is not only mine anymore." When she finished, the hall erupted into applause. But among all the clapping, she only searched for one face. Keanu. He sat quietly, his eyes steady, his nod small but filled with pride. After the event, as they walked out under the night sky, Sandra said softly, "I thought I would be crushed by fear, but when I spoke the truth, I felt free." Keanu replied, "Because truth doesn't chain you. It releases you." She smiled, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. But then came a new test. As they reached home, Sandra received another message, this one sharper than any before. It was from someone who once knew her closely, someone she once trusted. The message said, "You are pretending. You are not strong. Without him, you are nothing." The words shook her. Tears filled her eyes. Why does it always come back to this? Why do they all say, "I am nothing without you"? She asked Keanu with trembling hands. Keanu looked at her, his voice calm but firm. "Because they cannot see your light. They only see their own darkness reflected back. You must decide. Are you defined by their blindness or by your truth?" Sandra's tears fell, but inside her, something began to shift. For the first time, she did not feel only broken by those words. She felt challenged to prove them wrong. The next morning, Sandra sat by the window with the dress hanging beside her. She whispered, "This is no longer about what others think. This is about who I choose to be." Keanu entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of tea. He placed one beside her and said, "Then choose strength. Not because you must, but because you can." She looked at him, her eyes still wet but her heart steadier. "I will," she whispered. And in that quiet room, with sunlight touching the fabric of the dress, Sandra realized the final test was not from the world, but from within. The final step, the days that followed, were filled with reflection. Sandra no longer feared the dress, but she knew her journey was unfinished. Her strength was growing, but the words of doubt still lingered in the corners of her mind. One morning, she received an invitation that would bring everything to its peak. She was asked to speak at a large international gathering, not about fashion or appearances, but about kindness, respect, and resilience. It was the biggest stage she had ever faced. Leaders, artists, students, and strangers from many countries would be watching. The thought filled her with both hope and fear. She turned to Keanu and whispered, "This is more than I can handle." He looked at her calmly, his voice steady. "It is only more if you believe you are less. If you believe you are enough, then this stage is just another step." His words sank deep, but fear still held her heart. The day of the event arrived. The hall was massive, filled with thousands of people and cameras that broadcasted every moment. Sandra stood backstage, the dress draped on her shoulders. Her heart racing, she closed her eyes, hearing the voices of doubt. She doesn't belong. She's only here because of him. She's nothing without his name. But then she remembered the young girl's letter. She remembered the faces of those who clapped with true respect. She remembered Keanu's quiet voice telling her, "Truth doesn't chain you. It releases you." When her name was called, she stepped onto the stage. The lights were blinding, the silence heavy. Her voice trembled at first. "I was once afraid of being seen. I thought my worth depended on what others whispered about me. But I learned that whispers do not define us. Truth does." The hall listened in stillness. She continued, her voice growing steadier. "A simple dress became part of my story. People said it gave me light. But the truth is, the light was already inside me. The dress only reminded me of it. And every cruel word, every doubt, every envy, only taught me to stand taller." Her eyes softened as she added, "We do not need permission to shine. Kindness is strength. Humility is power. And resilience is the choice we make every day, when we rise after the world tries to push us down." For a long moment, the hall was silent. Then, slowly, applause filled the air. It grew louder and louder until the entire hall stood. Sandra's eyes searched through the sea of faces until they found Keanu. He was not clapping wildly. Instead, he gave her the same quiet nod he had always given, the nod that carried more weight than 1,000 cheers. After the event, as they walked together under the open night sky, Sandra whispered, "I felt like I was standing on the edge of myself, but instead of falling, I found wings." Keanu looked at her with calm eyes. "You didn't find wings. They were always there. You only learned to trust them." Her heart swelled at his words. She realized her journey had not been about a dress or about the whispers of the world. It had been about discovering her own strength and the quiet respect that had always walked beside her. That night, when she hung the dress carefully in her room, she no longer saw it as a piece of fabric. She saw it as a symbol, a reminder of every doubt she had faced and every step she had taken to rise above it. She whispered to herself, "This is not the end. This is the beginning of who I choose to be." And as she turned off the light, with the dress glowing faintly in the moonlight, Sandra finally felt free.